Welcome to Radio Free South Africa. This is your host, Karin Smith. Tonight, I'm very privileged and pleased to have as my guest Gividen, better well known these days as dailykenn.com. Kenn has written a little manual of quotes by Gividen called Kennisms, and two of my favorites are these. Whenever a white person defends him or herself against black violence, the white person will be identified as the racist aggressor and the black attacker the victim. And the other one I really, really enjoy is urban blight follows white flight. Welcome, Kenn.
How are you?
I'm great this evening, and you, Kenn?
I'm doing super.
Kenn, we were having a really great discussion on a previous radio show we did last week, and I was fascinated with some of your insights. So I'd like to discuss your view on what genocide really is.
Well, genocide, by simple definition I should say, is the destruction of any people group. But the word genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin back in 1943, 1944. And when he coined the word, he told us what he meant by that word when he said it. And this is an exact quote from Lemkin. He said, generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of a nation. So let me break in here and make an annotation. What he is telling us is our conventional perspective of genocide. While it's accurate, it's just part of the picture. Typically, we think of genocide as when one group of people goes in and violently destroys another group of people, like an Indian tribe would overtake another Indian tribe and wipe out the tribe. Well, that's genocide. Well, that's true. That is genocide, but that's only a small part of it, according to Lemkin. And by the way, if you're listening, that's spelled Lemkin. You can find it, you can Google it on the internet. Just type in Raphael, Raphael, Raphael Lemkin. So he said it's not necessarily just the destruction of a nation, but he goes on, and this is part of the quote. He says it's intended rather to signify a coordinated plan, and that is crucial. That it's a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of life of national groups. And so he's saying it's a plan to destroy a culture's foundation. And that's what we see happening in the United States. It's what we see happening in South Africa. Probably should put that in past tense, what we have seen happen in South Africa. It's what we see happening in Western Europe as the Islams move in, the Muslims rather move in and turn that part of the country, part of the world into maybe not an Islamic stronghold, but certainly enough Islamic influence to disrupt Western culture. So it's a coordinated plan, and the objective is to destroy the foundations. But he goes on and he says with the aim or the objective of annihilating the group themselves. And so the end objective is to destroy the group. So that's what we see happening to Western culture we've seen it in South Africa. We're seeing it even today in Western Europe, and to a lesser degree in Eastern Europe, throughout all of Europe. And we're certainly seeing it in the United States and Canada, outside Latin America. They are destroying us. But the key component of his definition is he says it's a coordinated plan. For example, there is a design, there is an end objective, and somebody has this in mind. They're trying to do it on purpose. It's not just a natural changing of the population group, which sometimes happen. But as we look at world history, We have seen genocide has been a part of civilization, even pre-civilization, where one people group overcomes another people group. But what makes the genocide of Western culture so different, Karin, is we're complicit. We're actually encouraging it. We're being a part of it. We are not resisting, as would normally happen. Somebody invades your house, the normal thing to do is kick him out. If you have to, use deadly force. But we are, by way of analogy, we are allowing our enemies to invade our homes and to take over. And for some reason, somebody's got inside our heads and convinced us that genocide, that somebody breaking into our house and killing us and taking over, is somehow a good thing. And I'm wondering, who is it that got inside our heads? And what technique did they use to change our minds to such a point where we think it's a good thing? So Lemkin goes on and he says the objective of such a plan would be the disintegration of the political and social institutions. And he names them. The political and social institution of culture, of language, of national feelings, of religion, and the economic existence of national groups. So what we see is through the process of the displacement of Western culture in the United States, Western Europe, South Africa, Australia, wherever you find white people, you find Western culture. And what we see is that culture is under attack on every level. And once again, I'm being a little bit redundant here, but we're complicit. Somehow they've got inside our heads and convinced us to resist that. Makes us bad people. But to welcome our own destruction makes us somehow morally superior. So, we think of ourselves as moral supremacists because we're allowing someone else to destroy us.
Absolutely.
But he says,
I read an article today in the Conservative Focus, and they say it's a globalist infiltration. And it is the globalists who appear to be dictating the marching orders to America's political ruling class. But at the same time, we are to blame because we are all fed up with politicians all over the world. It's not only America. It is everywhere in the world. We are fed up with our politicians dictating this influx of other people to genocide the white race. But we are not voting them out. Now, you can decide for yourself whether you believe that your vote counts or whether voting works, but we are sitting back and letting them do it.
I read a statistic a few months ago, and I haven't done research to validate whether or not it's accurate or not, but I read that since I think it was 1976, whenever Jimmy Carter was elected president, that was the last time that white people in America have voted for a Democrat. Every presidential election since then, white people have supported Republicans. So in a sense, we could say that the majority of white people are resisting, but there's not enough of us. So if that be true, and again, I really haven't done my background check like I should to make sure that's accurate, but if that be true, then we are already in a state of being occupied, that the bad guys are in control. We're no longer in control. So it's already happened. Now, something else I saw just last week is in Germany, somebody took a poll to see how many Germans agreed with, and I'm trying to think of the woman's name. She's the head of the major so-called far-right party in Germany. Her name doesn't come to mind offhand, but she had said that she thought if illegal aliens, speaking of refugees, so-called refugees from Syria, Muslims tried to enter Germany illegally, that she thought that the German military had the authority to shoot those people. No, she didn't think it was a good idea to do it if there was any other option, but as a last option, she thought it was okay to shoot them to protect their nation. And so somebody did a poll, and they discovered that 29% of Germans agreed with her. Now, I don't know what percentage of Germany remains ethnic German, but that may be, I'm guessing, as high as maybe 40% of Germans say, yeah, if they try to invade our country, go ahead and shoot them because it's a matter of national defense. So the reason I say that is there is a growing movement, as you notice, within Western civilization of resistance. But it's too little too late, and there still seems to be a majority of white people who have this delusion that there is a moral principle involved of letting people take over our culture. And what's missing, Karin, is we don't understand that Western civilization, Western culture, has provided the infrastructure, technological, especially in healthcare, that has enhanced the lives of everybody. So when the superstructure falls, when Western culture falls, what's going to happen to everybody else? Well, they're going to fall right along with it. And we need to keep in mind that the globalist, who, by the way, in my mind is synonymous with Marxist, I call it global Marxism, but their objective is that everybody be equal. They want everyone to be economically the same, except, of course, for themselves. They see themselves as superior. But that's the end objective in my mind. That's where we're going with this thing. But anyhow, he said, going back to what Raphael Lemkin said when he was defining genocide,
yes,
he said the objective of such a plan would be the disintegration of the political and social institutions, which we're seeing the assault on Christianity in the United States. Even if you're not a Christian, you have to admit that that is a key foundation of our country. Back in 1780, when the first census poll was taken, virtually everybody in this country was a Christian of some kind. Some of them may have been deists, some of them may have belonged to different denominations of one type or another. Some were, a few were Catholics in Maryland. But everybody was a Christian except for the Indians, but they weren't technically citizens. So everyone who was a citizen of a country when it was founded was a Christian of some sort. We could say that America was made up of God-fearing, Bible-thumping, whiskey-drinking church people. That's who we were. And that is what... What?
You've got the ones that cling to their rifles.
Yeah, and we had... yeah, we had the right of self-defense. Remember, the first major upheaval in the United States after we became a nation was the Whiskey Rebellion, when George Washington decided he was going to pay the war debt by assessing a tax on whiskey, which wasn't a whole lot different from King George assessing a stamp tax or a tax on tea. And there was an uprising, and people were killed. And to my knowledge, that is one of the only times in American history, one of the few times in American history, where our federal troops were turned against the citizens. I think there was an episode early in the 20th century when that happened in Washington, D.C., but it wasn't a national uprising. So, we're very sensitive about big government, or we were, but that's who we were. We were founded. I can't say America was founded as a Christian nation, but we were certainly Christian as we were founded. I can't find a document that says we were a Christian nation, but everybody was. So why would you need a document that says that, if that makes sense?
Yes.
So when they try to destroy Christianity in America, they're really not going after Christianity. They're going after our culture. It's a form of genocide. So when we have these groups who masquerade as atheists, but really they're globalist and Marxist, And by the way, there are a lot of conservative atheists. People don't know that, but there are a lot of libertarians and conservatives. Well, like Matt Drudge, for example, or the late great Breitbart. They were infamously atheists who defended and supported Western culture and our traditions. But what the predatory left did, what the globalists did when they attacked religion, is they tried to intimidate us where we would take down religious symbols, and they were very successful. That's why you'd be hard-pressed to find a courthouse that has the Ten Commandments somewhere on the property. And I will guarantee you there is no new courthouse being built anywhere in America that has the Ten Commandments as a part of the structure. The same thing is true of virtually every new school building. And so the globalists have succeeded in that area of genocide. They have attacked our religion. And again, you don't have to be a Christian to recognize that America was founded as a Christian nation. And when the globalists try to assault that fundamental of who we are, they're assaulting everybody. They're assaulting our culture. That's one of our social institutions. I don't know if you remember. Well, I think you're old enough to remember back in the 1960s. I think it was 1964 when the Beatles invaded the United States, and that was they called it Beatlemania. And I always thought it was kind of weird, but I have to admit I did like their hairdo, because when I was a kid I hated getting haircuts. But in the late 1960s, remember, Karin, the Beatles converted to some kind of a Hindu, I don't know what they were, some kind of a Hindu.
Yes, they came to America. They're more popular than God.
Yeah, they're more popular than God. But they tried to foster upon the young people some form of Eastern religion. I can't remember exactly what it was. But they wore the Nehru jackets, and, I think they may have been Hare Krishnas. Man, my mind just doesn't go back that far and remember. But that's what they were doing, is they were attacking our religion. I don't think those guys honestly believe that nonsense, but they were part of it. And they didn't get too far. But now we have another onslaught of Islam that is attacking that social institution, part of our culture. And Lemkin also said, Karin, that genocide tries to destroy our native language. Now, there was a lawsuit filed, I think it was in Louisiana, I can't remember the state, where they had sued the counties. In Louisiana it would have been parishes, but the equivalent of counties, trying to force them to print multilingual ballots. And the effort was made by those who spoke Spanish. And they said that if they're not bilingual, then it's inhibiting our ability to participate in the democratic process. Well, the problem with that is, if you print bilingual languages, who are you leaving out? I mean, some people don't speak English or Spanish. Some people speak Chinese. Yeah. Some people speak German. Well, there are 6,500 languages on Earth. So if you're going to be fair, you'd have to print every ballot 6,500 times, to accommodate everybody, which is so impractical. It actually undermines the democratic process. It doesn't enhance it.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned on the show that we were on the other day, every time you are asked, when you make a phone call and they ask you to press 1 for English, that's genocide. They're taking away our language. The other day I was in a shopping mall, and they were making announcements over the intercom, which I guess were pre-recorded. I don't know what they were saying, because they were in, I think, Chinese. Well, the interesting thing is there were no Chinese in the mall. Why were they doing that? Well, they were trying to be, I guess, multicultural or diverse, whatever, trying to be accommodating. But what is happening is we are undergoing a process of genocide. They are taking away our language, our sense of history. There is a guy on YouTube who's very popular. His name is Stefan. I think he pronounces it Melano. I'm not sure how he pronounces it. He's actually British or Canadian. I don't remember which. But he used the analogy of a tree that has no roots. And if you attack the roots, strike the root is the saying. If you go after the roots, the tree falls over.
Yes.
And what they are doing in the United States, and we saw this in South Africa, and we're seeing it in Europe, is they are striking the roots of our civilization. They're taking away our religion, they're taking away our language, they're taking away our history. You know, why is it that a few years ago the Confederate flag was considered a benign symbol of good old boys? It was redneck Southern America. We didn't, people down south honored and revered the Confederate flag. Those of us up north, we respected it, but we didn't necessarily revere it. But we saw it as a benign symbol of Southern culture. What's wrong with that? Well, nothing. Well, something happened within the last, I don't know, maybe 5-7 years, where the Confederate flag has become demonized. It's become a symbol of hate and racism. Who did that? Who got inside our heads and convinced us that the Confederate flag was a bad thing? It was an evil thing. You know, I want to know who's behind this. And the answer is it's this movement towards globalism. And by the way, this thought comes to mind before I say something else, is that there really are only two options. If you're not a globalist, you're a nationalist. And if you're not a nationalist, you're a globalist. So if you're not a globalist, welcome to the club. You're a nationalist. Well, the globalists call those of us who are the vast majority nationalists. They say, well, if you're a nationalist, you're a Nazi. So they say there's two choices. You can be a globalist or you can be a Nazi, which is total nonsense, but people actually believe that.
Yes.
And I believe that nations are here for a reason. That's the best way to organize society, because when you have a globalist economy, a globalist government, whoever's in control of the globe controls us. And we find that centralized government, and that's why I'm a convinced libertarian, is a globalized government, or centralized government, I should say, is just not efficient and it's not effective. It hurts people. We need to govern ourselves. So he says the objective of the plan is the disintegration of the political and social institutions of culture, language, and he says also national feelings. Well, that's part of the root that they're attacking. We don't feel good about being Americans. I can remember back when I was in high school, Karin, there was a movement to slander the founders of our nation. They said that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, and we know that he did, but then they said that he was a philanderer, as was Benjamin Franklin, and they questioned George Washington, and the founders of our country. They began to demonize them. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Indianapolis in the government school system, we learned that the heroes of our nation were like George Washington and Betsy Ross. Well, who are the heroes of America's history now? Well, they're Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
Yes.
Who made that decision? Well, I mean, when I was a kid, Martin Luther King was unknown. Nobody knew who he was. Few people knew who Rosa Parks were after she supposedly got kicked out of her seat on the bus, which, by the way, is a false narrative. And again, this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but when Rosa Parks was on the bus, yeah, go ahead.
Because they're still carrying that forward. I mean, if you look at Martin Luther King Day, Obama was all about Rosa Parks in the bus, and I think he even went and sat in the back seat or some such movie-type thing, just for optics. So tell me that was not true.
Yeah, if I remember right, Obama actually got on the bus and did a photo op of himself sitting where Rosa Parks sat. Yes. The story is that Rosa Parks was sitting in the white section and they made her move, which is not true. She was where she was sitting that day. She was ordered to move. She was perfectly legal, even under Jim Crow laws. Because what the way the law read was if the black section was filled, then black people could sit in the white section, which is where Rosa Parks was sitting. She was obeying the law, even the Jim Crow laws. But the bus driver, they say that the two of them had a spat earlier, not the day, but maybe weeks before, and so he didn't like her and she didn't like him. Well, on the buses, the bus driver's kind of like personnel on an airplane. They have authority. You have to do what they tell you to do. And so he was just being a jerk, and he told her to get up and move. And his only legal precedence was he was the bus driver. Had nothing to do with Jim Crow laws whatsoever. So they created a whole false narrative about this woman being abused by Jim Crow, which is not true. I mean, the guy was a jerk, and he should have left her alone. That, or she was being a jerk, or they were both being jerks, I don't know, but it's a false narrative, however you want to take it. But the point is, we're seeing our culture under a state of siege. It is a process of genocide because they are taking away our national feelings. We no longer respect George Washington and Betsy Ross. Now we honor Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, who, quite frankly, had nothing to do with the founding of this nation. Now, from a globalist perspective, America, as they understand it, really was founded with the civil rights movement. I mean, they never say that verbatim, but that's the way it's presented. The prior to the so-called civil rights movement, which I think even that term, Karin, is a misnomer. I mean, it's not civil and it's not right. In my mind, a civil right, it means you have the freedom of association to hang out with whoever you want to hang out with. They can't force you to do something against your will. So. Do what?
And association, not hang out with them if you don't feel like it. You have that right.
Yeah, you should have that right. And to underscore that principle, have you ever noticed, Karin, that white liberals, privileged white liberals, almost always live in white neighborhoods?
Yes.
It's amazing. Yes. You never see them moving into a black neighborhood.
No.
The neighborhood. Yeah, go ahead.
It's exactly the same in South Africa. The liberals live in gated communities with guards on the gates and 8-foot walls around the whole place, and generally on a golf course, and they are so detached from reality that it's easy for them to stick their head in the sand. Sorry, I was almost rude again. Stick their heads in the sand and not see reality because they don't have to.
Yep. Well, Michael Moore, who's probably one of the most outspoken liberals in the country right now, you know, the film producer who makes these documentaries. Yeah, he lives in a white neighborhood, lives in a white community, lives in a gated community, I think. He's very wealthy. He's totally detached from the reality of urban violence and urban crime. So if these people see themselves as privileged, thinking of Hillary Clinton, if they see themselves as endowed with white privilege, why don't they move into a black housing project and redistribute their white privilege? It'd be a simple thing to do. Plus, they'd save a lot of money on rent because rent is cheap down there. Well, the reason they won't do that is because there is a part of them that recognizes reality. They're just in denial. They won't acknowledge it. You know, I live in what I call a Jim Crow neighborhood because it's predominantly white. And I will guarantee you, if black families started moving in my neighborhood, the first people to put up for sale signs and back up U-Haul trailers to their front door would be the privileged white liberals. They'd get out of here. They'd make up some lame excuse while they're moving, but they are, in fact, bald-faced hypocrites, and they don't even recognize it. So part of genocide, Karin, is the erosion of our national feelings, an erosion of our language, our culture, and religion. But the other thing they are attacking is the economic existence of national groups. That's another thing that Raphael Lemkin mentioned. And so they're going after our economy. So we see that across the board, that the globalist, which again I think is synonymous with Marxist because the end objective is the same, is they are trying to destroy Western culture. Well, the question is why? Why would they do that? Does it make sense? it is, quite frankly, nonsensical. The way I like to say it is, if liberals were logical, they wouldn't be liberals. So why are they trying to destroy Western culture when it's going to hurt everybody? Do they not know that? And I think the answer is because they see an economic disparity between Western culture and the third world. And to a Marxist, that's anathema. To a Marxist, that's anathema. That is the ultimate sin, is to have an economic disparity. Now, it doesn't occur to them that statistically, in 2014, for the first time in human history, which goes back, I don't know how many tens of thousands of years, depending on one's perspective, but in 2014, for the first time in thousands and thousands and thousands of years of human history, the abject poverty level has dropped below 10%. That's never, ever happened before. And the reason for that is because we live in a world where free economies are displacing centralized government. And we have Western civilization, Western culture, where innovation is centered. And when you couple innovation with free markets, the outcome is prosperity. And so we would say free markets coupled with innovation begets prosperity. And so the reason the world is prosperous right now, we're no longer living in abject poverty as we once did, is because the innovation of Western culture coupled with free markets. Well, these idiots want to destroy Western culture because they don't care about quality of life. The only thing they care about is equality of life. They want us all to be the same. In their minds, that is the ultimate moral standard. Everybody's got to be equal. Now, if we all live in grass huts, they're perfectly okay with that, as long as everybody, except for themselves, lives in a grass hut. If we don't have access to health care, they're perfectly okay with that, as long as everybody has the same access, which is no access. Well, at least we're all equal, so they're happy. That's the direction that we're moving. They're attacking Western culture because they see a disparity, an economic disparity, and they hate that. You know, I'm absolutely amazed that we have, for the first time that I can ever remember, we have an avowed socialist running for president and being taken seriously. I can't remember any time in American history when that's ever happened. Maybe it happened back in the 1930s, but even then I can't remember of anyone who self-identified as a socialist. And Bernie Sanders is phenomenally successful relative to other socialists in the past, and who knows, he may win the Democratic Party nomination. So that just tells you, you kind of mentioned before that we're not resisting, and that's evidence of that. Who got inside our heads that convinced us that a goofball socialist would make a good candidate for president? And the interesting thing about that is, Karin, Bernie Sanders, and this goes back to what we were talking about regarding hypocrisy, Bernie Sanders promotes himself as an outspoken anti-racist. But where does Bernie Sanders live? He lives in a state, I think he's from New Hampshire, is that right? He lives in, not New Hampshire, but Vermont. He lives in a state that is 99.5% white.
Yeah.
Why, if he's anti-racist, why doesn't he move to a state that is, why doesn't he move down south somewhere where the black population is concentrated? Why doesn't he move into an urban area in a major city like Detroit or Chicago or Birmingham, Alabama, or Selma, Alabama? Why doesn't he move, or Montgomery? Why doesn't he move in with all these poor, depraved people who really need his help? The answer is he's a blooming hypocrite, just flat out. And if you look at his rallies and the people who attend his rallies, they're all white people. So, you know, they posture themselves and cover themselves in this moralistic mantle that they are anti-racist and they're standing up for the little guy, but what they say and what they do, two different things. The way they want to help non-white people is through government force. They don't want to do it themselves. And I suppose there are some exceptions out there. I suppose there are some liberal white people who move into black neighborhoods and genuinely try to help folks, but I can't think of one. You think of all the white Hollywood liberals, which of them lives in a black neighborhood? Come to think of it, what black liberal in Hollywood lives in a black neighborhood?
Exactly.
Can't think of any of them.
Exactly. I have a very good friend who is a show host. Her name is Carla from Sister Thunder Show. Now, she's a black lady. And on one of our shows, she caused chaos by saying that even blacks don't want to live in black neighborhoods because they know they're going to get robbed, raped, and murdered. And that the backlash from that was unbelievable. But it's true, is it not? That as soon as you move out of the poverty level, you move out of your black neighborhood, black or white, doesn't matter. You move to a safer, better place. We all do it.
Yeah, and so they're admitting they have a problem by virtue of the fact they don't want to live there. And who can blame them? I wouldn't want to live there. Can't blame them for not wanting to live there. And, we both know that there are a lot of, I read a statistic somewhere, Karin, that I think there are 35,000 black millionaires in the United States. There may be as many as 100,000. It depends on whose statistic you listen to.
Yeah.
So the opportunity is there. If they can get out, they can make it if they have the raw material, the raw talent, the aptitude for success. They can become successful. They're not being held back. That should be very obvious. But we watched I didn't watch it, but I heard about the Super Bowl halftime show. And I don't even know how to pronounce her name. I think they pronounce her Beyonce or something like that. Beyonce, yeah. She is advocating this racist hate group, the Black Panthers. Somebody called them Black Pampers. I thought that was funny. But she's advocating this black hate group in the Super Bowl. It seems to me that you watch the Super Bowl to escape the frustration of politics, and she enters it right into the middle of the game. But the point is, if you look at her, Beyonce, she tries to look like a white woman. She has white hair. She has light skin. I don't know if that's natural or fake, but she's trying to look like a white person. Why is she embarrassed about who she is? If you look at a picture of Oprah Winfrey taken, 20, 30 years ago, and look at her today, her skin has lightened. How did that happen? And I think that's fine. It's their business. They want to do it. But the problem is the hypocrisy. They're saying white people are the ultimate evil, but we want to be like them. So you're saying you want to be like the ultimate evil. That doesn't make sense. I made a video today and posted it on my website, dailykenn.com, if anyone cares to look at it. But I made the announcement that at the next Super Bowl, 2017, instead of honoring the Black Panthers, they're going to honor the Ku Klux Klan, and they're going to have these guys in Klan uniforms dancing around the stage and putting on a performance.
And you are so right. You are absolutely right, because if we did that, can you imagine? Can you just imagine? The outcry, the police presence, you'd be in jail in 5 minutes if you tried that.
Yep, there'd be blowback, unbelievable. But the positive side of that, Karin, is I think a lot of people are thinking the way you and I are thinking, and they're saying, wait a minute, these people are racist. No, they may not say it out loud, but they can see the hypocrisy. And that, I think what Beyonce did with her stupid halftime show is she may inadvertently been presenting a Donald Trump campaign promotion. Because I think a lot of white people were put off by that, and they're saying, wait a minute, this is just not right. So I could be wrong, but I think, there's 100,000 people that attend the Super Bowl and they pay $3,000 a ticket, whatever, just astronomical. To see some goofball, racist, honoring the Black Panthers, this violent hate group, One of the things I find a little, speaking of hypocrisy, Karin, one of the things I find a little bit inconsistent is we condemn the Ku Klux Klan, these guys in their silly robes and hats, but while we're condemning them, we welcome the world's largest hate group, Islam. And what do those women wear? They wear hoods and hats that cover their head. What's the difference? They're black instead of white. I mean, the robes are. They wear black robes instead of white robes. Instead of the pointy white hats, they wear, their hijab or whatever they call it over their head. What we need to come to understand is the world's largest, oldest, and deadliest hate group in existence is Islam.
Yes.
Now imagine
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, yes, there is nothing in their entire book of the Quran. There's nothing about love and peace and togetherness and Christian charity. It is just hatred. Kill the infidel. End of story, They are the biggest hate group. And they're not a nation or a race. They are just religious fanatics.
Yeah, that's true, but Karin, since 9/11/2001, there has been well over 27,000 Muslim terror attacks somewhere in the world. There's about 3 a day. They're killing people without it, with impunity.
Yes.
Yet
yes.
President Obama goes and speaks at one of the rallies.
He went to visit one of the mosques where the imam is being watched by the FBI for sympathies and possible terrorist organization going on in the mosque. But he went there and said that, well, once again, he says that the Muslims have been here since the beginning of America and provided so much input into what America is today. And this is what our kids are believing. And people who watch TV are believing this nonsense being spewed by him. And how do you make them see the truth?
Well, that is a part of genocide, is rewriting our history, teaching our kids that we are people that we are not. And it's not only telling our kids that Muslims played an integral part in our history. I can't imagine what they did, other than spark the first international war we were ever engaged in. I can't think of a single thing. Apparently he's come up with something, but I can't imagine what it is. But they rewrite our history. Well, to answer your question, how do you set the record straight? The only way you can do it is through the truth. The way I like to say it is that our minds have been programmed. Our minds have been infested with a cultural Marxism virus. We've talked about this before. And the only way to purge our brains of that virus, the antivirus program, is the truth, which we have on our side. But we have to have a voice to get that out. And it's increasingly more difficult. But what we have access to at this very moment is we have the internet, we have the radio show like the one you're doing now, so we do have vehicles to get the word out. But how do people respond when you tell them the truth? Well, the mind that has been programmed with cultural Marxism is programmed to react to the truth by immediately thinking racist. If you tell the truth, you must be a racist. It has nothing to do with logic. It has nothing to do with reality. It's totally disassociated with reason. For example, several years ago, I had a little blog that nobody read, and I was doing some research. I just kind of wondered about the history of slavery in America, and I said, well, I wonder who the first slave owner was. So just on a whim, I started researching it. And I found the first legal slave owner in American history was a guy by the name of Anthony Johnson, colonist back in the mid-17th century. And I was reading about this guy, and I said, now, wait a minute. He's a black guy. Is this, is something, am I mistaken here? Am I misreading something? And I went back and I read it again, and they even had a picture of him. you know what, drawing, obviously. The first slave owner in American history, first legal slave owner in American history, was a black guy named Anthony Johnson. So I wrote up my little blog post, which I thought nobody would read, and I put a link to that post on in a comment section of a website. Well, a major conservative website saw that post, and they basically plagiarized it. Now, I know that because when I saw their post, they basically said the exact same thing. They used my words. They copied and pasted what I said. So they did some of their own writing and elaborated on it. But the point of all that is this. I had this tiny little blog at the time, which maybe 17 people a day read. But that little bit of activism, somebody picked up on it, and now it's universally known to anybody who's paying attention that the first slave owner in American history was a black guy. It's undeniable. It's indisputable. And once that began to spread across the Internet, what happened was the handlers in Washington decided that Barack Obama's mother was descended from the first slave owner. Well, they just flat out lied. They made up somebody else who was supposed to be the first slave owner. But the point is, we got to him, and it didn't take a whole lot of effort. So, you know, your question was, how do we tell kids the truth? How do we inform them? Well, we just keep telling the truth. And hopefully somebody's going to encounter reality, and they're going to realize that the cultural Marxism that's inside their brain is wrong. And the way to deprogram minds infected with a cultural Marxism virus is the truth. That is the antidote. This is reality. Look at it. This is the fact. But we have been mentally conditioned not to respond, but to react to reality with visceral hatred. If you start telling the truth, okay.
I just want to throw some figures in there. There was a very interesting piece in the Federal Observer about how many slaves landed in the U.S., and it says the most comprehensive analysis of shipping records over the course of the slave trade is the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database. And it says in there, between 1525 and 1866, in the entire history of the slave trade to the New World, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10.7 million survived the Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. How many of these 10.7 million were shipped directly to North America? 388,000. So that is a minute percentage of 10.7 million. The overwhelming percentage of the African slaves were shipped directly to the Caribbean and South America. Brazil received 4.86 million. So you got an incredibly small percentage of them, and yet your country is the one that must pay reparations and whatever else. And you must be forever guilty because of that.
That's how they get inside our heads. That is the false narrative that our kids are learning in school. I read a story, actually posted the story on my website a couple weeks ago, that there was a kid who called into the Rush Limbaugh show. I think he was 10 years old. And he went to a private school, and the teacher asked the students to write on the chalkboard someone in American history who was, I can't remember what her term was, but somebody who was had some social impact on the nation. And this was in celebration of Martin Luther King holiday, which is nonsense, but, you know, we're stuck with it. Well, this kid went up to the chalkboard and he wrote down Donald Trump. And, well, I guess she threw a hissy fit, made him erase it, you know, and, you know, what did Trump ever do for America? Well, you know, he created jobs, whatever, like him or not like him. The point is that these people in our government schools, this, by the way, was a private school, but people who are teaching in our government schools are corralling the minds of our kids. They're telling them what is true and what is not true, except what they say is true is a lie, and what they say is a lie is not true. And so they are brainwashing our kids. I mean, when I was in school, once again, the hero was George Washington and Betsy Ross, not Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, where they're teaching them something very different. Of course, they boast of themselves as being for tolerance, but that poor little kid, they showed him nothing but disrespect and intolerance. So that's what we have to encounter. The thought comes to mind, Karin, talking about how our kids are being brainwashed. If we could project our minds 100 years in the future, say the year 2116, what are school children going to be learning in their history classes? If we have schools, I'm not sure we're even going to have a country by then. Are they going to be learning that Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb? You know, it's possible. Could be.
Absolutely.
Do what?
Kenn, because you know and I know that Chris Barnard did the first open heart transplant operation in the world. Now we know that. It is an absolute fact. I knew Chris Barnard and his wife. He did that operation. Well, some years ago, a story came out in South Africa that actually he was a drunkard and high on drugs, and he did not do the operation. A black janitor who had been watching his operations in the operation theater, he actually did that first heart transplant, and he was held as a hero all over South Africa. Now, if they can do that just overnight, change an absolute worldwide hero who has changed medicine for good, and say that the guy who swept the floors actually did it, and get people to believe it, there's very little hope for this world.
That's a part of genocide. They're changing our history. You know, they're doing the same thing. That's the same principle behind demonizing the Confederate flag. They're trying to make us out to be somebody we're not. They're trying to make us white people out to be racist because of the slave trade, like you pointed out. But Karin, nobody stops to consider that white people ended slavery.
No.
You know, it was Western culture that put a stop to it.
But in the black countries and in the Arab countries, slavery still exists to this day. And nobody points that out either.
No, they don't. At least not, we will. But nobody left of center will, and they control the media. So.
But in general,
I'm wondering 100 years from now if they will be told, Karin, that there were some black people who invented the light bulb, and Thomas Edison got a hold of their plans and stole it and took credit for it.
Oh, absolutely, because Kenn, you can see it all over the world. You are suddenly seeing whole pages of black achievements and black inventions and black people did, but they didn't. You say it so often. Just look around where you're sitting right now and name one thing that was invented by a black person. And you can't. You can't. You look at your clothes, your shoes, your PC, your telephone, your big lighter, your everything. Nothing has been invented or created by them. So, to be ashamed of being white is ridiculous because we should be so proud of ourselves.
Well, the comedian Chris Rock notoriously said that white people need to own up to their history. And what he meant was we need to own up to the revisionist history, which is not true. But in accurate terms, I agree with him. We should own up to our history. You know, the Wright brothers invented the airplane. White people. What's wrong with admitting that? But 100 years from today, little children are going to learn that the Wright brothers stole the plans from some black people. They took credit for it.
Yes, absolutely. It was black people who built that plane, and we did it on the sweat of black backs, and so now we owe them a share of every airline in the world. I mean, this thing is ridiculous. Kenn, on that thought, we're coming up to an ad break. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. Welcome back to Radio Free South Africa. This is your host, Karin Smith, and our guest tonight is Kenn Gividen, who has some unique perspectives on things that he puts in such a simple way that are beyond me. Welcome back, Kenn.
Good evening, Karin. It's always good to be on your show. I appreciate so much the work that you're doing, and I try every opportunity to help the folks in South Africa. I got to be honest, I really don't know what those people are going through, because until you are there and see it and experience it, you really can't totally empathize with what they're having to endure. But certainly, it's a travesty that should command our attention.
Ken, it's what you say, that what has happened in South Africa has come here and all over the world. And the other thing that you say is that without the medical technology and advances and creativeness of the Western world, where would the black people be today? Because in South Africa, during those dreaded apartheid years that the world hates us for, the black life expectancy increased by 20 years. Now, that is an enormous increase of life expectancy. Always struggle with that word. And the other thing is, the black population in South Africa grew by 920% in less than 50 years. Now, if you don't put that down to white medical technology at white hospitals, white doctors, what do you put it down to? So, what you were saying earlier is what would the world be like if we were all mixed race, or if we had gotten rid of all the white population in the world, which seems to be the end game here. History would not be the only thing that is rewritten. Would there be people even qualified to write history books?
Well, the answer is the end game is we all live in grass huts, and we have a very high mortality rate, and we go back to bathing our babies in cow urine. That's the direction we're going in. And they don't care. The Marxists are perfectly happy as long as we're all equal except for them.
Yeah, there's one
of
those.
So it's really a tragedy.
There's one of your Kennisms that I like so much, that conservatives want us to all be equal at the starting line, and the Democrats want us all to be equal at the finishing line. Now, if we breed competitiveness or beat it out of our children, where do they have any reason to be the best that they can be? If you're going to get a prize for just showing up, and if you're going to get an award at school for just having attended 1 or 2 days, then why do you need to be the best that you can be? It frightens me, because competition is a very, very healthy thing. And it's what you were saying. They don't like the capitalist free market way of running things. But it's the only way that breeds success, is it not?
It certainly is the most efficient and most effective path to prosperity. And government regulation has to be there for it to be fair. But when the government becomes overwhelming, it destroys it. The analogy that I like to use is we have you live in a log cabin and you got a fireplace, and as long as the fire is kept in the fireplace, it's a useful thing. It gives you warmth, it gives you a place to cook your food. But if the fire gets out of the fireplace, it consumes everything it touches, burns it down in your cabin, starts a forest fire. It's totally destructive until it burns itself out. Well, that's what happens with government. As long as we control it and use it to our benefit, it's a good thing. As soon as it gets out of its place, out of the fireplace, it consumes everything it touches. It destroys everything. And that's what we're seeing happening. That's the reason that I subscribe to what most people would call libertarian philosophy. I like to say I just believe in freedom. I don't know why you have to put a word to it, but, small government, there is no perfect government. I think we all know that. But small government, when it gets out of our way, is the most efficient and it is the most effective path toward prosperity, and that's why we see that we're living in a very prosperous world. We're living in the early 21st century. Now, if you go back 100 years and see how people lived then, it was, compared to today, it was Spartan. 100 years ago, I don't think there were any radio stations. Very few people had electric lights in their house. Some did. The idea of central heating was just coming into being. If you go back 150 years, nobody had air conditioning. Nobody had central heat. Nobody had electric lights. Nobody had an automobile. Didn't even know what they were. So we are living right now at the apex of civilization, the apex of technology. And the credit goes to who? It goes to Western culture. We are the ones who put all this together. And when you destroy that infrastructure, when you destroy Western culture, it's all going to be gone. Now, they're not going to be able to rebuild it. That is to say, once, those who are not part of Western culture.
Yeah.
What they will do is they will blame us for destroying it. They will take credit for building it, and they'll say that we destroyed it. That's the direction we're going.
Ken, you just have to look at South Africa. Just look at South Africa. In 1994, we handed over a first world economic powerhouse that provided food for half of Africa plus exports to the rest of the world. Look at it 20 years later. Our roads are a catastrophe. And yet we have toll roads until it's more expensive to take a 5-hour road trip. The toll roads cost you more than the gas costs you to take that trip. So the roads are in disarray. The railways, which we don't have a good bus service in that country at all. It just doesn't exist. So the commuters use the railways or the black taxis. The railway system, which is used by hundreds of thousands of blacks every single day, well, the trains are burnt, the trains are derailed, the train stations are burnt, so that is in disarray. Then they spent billions on new trains that they ordered from a Spanish company. And the engineers on the Spanish companies kept saying to the guy, look, these trains are too tall and they will not run on your South African railway system because your overpasses are too short for these trains, etc., etc. Well, this guy, who was apparently a highly effective engineer, he bought the trains anyway for billions of rands. The first train that ran derailed because guess what? The trains are too high for the South African system. So now they've bought a whole bunch of buses, which they were told are too wide for South African roads, and the doors are on the wrong side. So when you get out of the bus, you get out straight into the street. Well, our great government, in their infinite wisdom, ordered billions of rands of these buses. Now they can't be used because our streets are too narrow for them. So the electricity has gone to hell. You know all about rolling blackouts, and so do any listeners, that the electricity system in South Africa is finished. The water supply is tainted. They're pumping in seawater directly into people's houses and telling them that it's perfectly safe to drink and cook with and everything in this seawater. In some towns, you just turn on a tap and blood comes out because the abattoir's drains are connected to the clean water supply. So there's that. Then the sewage system. They are now building whole areas of homes where the sewage doesn't go to a sewage recycling plant. It goes straight into the sea. So you can see for yourself what you said they won't be able to replace. Well, they're not replacing. They're not even attempting to. They are taxing people into poverty, replacing every single white who has got a job with some person who is not qualified, or 3 or 4 persons for one white person who are not qualified to do the job, or keeping positions vacant. They are paying themselves overinflated salaries. They have a bigger Congress, you would call it here, than you have here in the States. Ours is 4 times as big in a country a fraction of the size, paying them huge salaries. Our president is one of the highest paid presidents in the world. What does anybody expect is going to happen given that scenario?
Well, it's called regression to the norm. And it's inevitable.
Yes.
Unless somebody takes a proactive position and changes things, which is what the Europeans did when they first settled in South Africa. One thing that the Marxists hate is when we say that the South Africa, aside from the Bantu or the Khoi, was virtually uninhabited. They go crazy when you tell them that, but it's the truth.
Yes.
And so they took this region of the world that was, from a human perspective, it was desolate. I mean, it was rich in resources, but as far as human capital, there just weren't that many people there outside of the Bantu or the Khoi, which, quite frankly, I'm not sure I know the difference between the two groups, but there apparently is, otherwise it wouldn't have two names. But the Europeans came in, and where for tens of thousands of years there was nothing, now there are modern cities. There's electricity, there's plumbing, there's all these modern conveniences, which is now reversing. It's regressing. It's going backwards. It's because they have, the Marxists want us to all to be equal, and they demonize white people. And Marxism does not care about humanity. They are anti-humanitarians. They will destroy humans as long as their moralistic perspective is respected and enforced, and that is we all have to be treated equally. Well, we can't do that. If you go on the internet, and this is easy to find, the research of Dr. Richard Lynn, and he did studies in IQ, and he actually pinned an average IQ to every nation on the planet. And there is no research that is more verifiable than the average IQ of humanity. I mean, the law of gravity is very obvious. We all know that. And the average IQ of people groups is very obvious. People don't want to believe it. It doesn't matter. It's still there. But you can go on the internet and you can see nation by nation, average IQ by nation, and you can see the nations with lowest IQ are in Africa. We may not like it, but it's a fact, and we have to deal with reality, Karin. Of course, you know that, but they want us to deny reality, to pretend something is true that's not true. Well, you can't do that because people suffer when you do that. That's as silly as saying that the reason that I don't play NBA basketball is because of racial discrimination. That's because I can't. I just don't have the ability. It's not there. So that's what we're up against.
No, I understand that absolutely. In South Africa as well, we were all going to come to a common denominator, but the problem is we are not all lifted up to the highest denominator. We are all brought down to the lowest common denominator, and then civilization falls apart. And if anybody doesn't believe it, just look at Africa. If you look at Zimbabwe, if you look at Namibia, if you look at Mozambique, if you look at any of the countries where they were white colonies, you will see how they have become. If there was worse than a banana republic, I would call them that, because that is what they have become. The movers and shakers, the innovators, the creators have been gotten rid of. And now where are all those people wanting to go? Follow the whites into another white country. They hate us with a passion. They sing songs, kill the Boer. They talk about one settler, one bullet. They sing, bring me my machine gun and I will kill them all and we'll drive them into the sea. Mad Bob Mugabe from Zimbabwe says with one side of his lips, please bring the white farmers back because we've got 1.4 or 14 million starving people in Zimbabwe. But on the other side of his mouth, he's saying he's getting rid of the last remaining white farmers there. I mean, really, just look at Africa, and in particular Zimbabwe and South Africa. And you will see what the end game is for the rest of the world. But people don't want to look.
That's the problem, Karin, is they don't want to look. People like to believe that they, well, you've heard the expression, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yes.
So we think that we see what we believe instead of believe what we see.
Yeah.
For example, if you convince people, and they're very good at doing this, you convince people that a cow is your ancestor, then every time they see a cow, they will see what they believe. They'll see their ancestor. That's why in India they let the cows run around the streets.
Yes, they don't eat beef because they worship the cow.
Yeah, and if you believe that you believe in this nonsense called white privilege, if that's what you believe, that's what you're going to see. Everywhere you look, you're going to see white privilege. If you believe that white people are racist, well, that's what you're going to see. Everywhere you look, you're going to see evidence of white racism. Now, I got to tell you, I don't know one person, personally, one white person, who is a racist. I don't know of anybody. Now, I know they exist because I see them on the internet. Sometimes they say horrible things. So I know they're out there, but of all the white people I know, I don't know of a single individual who dislikes people by virtue of their unchangeable characteristic, which is race. I don't know of anybody. Yet we are led to believe that it is widespread, that it's innate, that it's been proven in government-subsidized university tests that when a white baby is born, before it can even speak, it's obvious that it's racist. Where do they come up with this? I don't know. But that's what we're taught to believe, and so we see
only
it.
White people, Ken, because in South Africa the government has said quite categorically that only white people can be racist. Blacks cannot be racist. So it's now a law, practically, that whites are that way. And as you say, I have also seen some horrible comments on social media, but I personally do not know anybody because they will tell you, I really know some really nice black people, and I know some black people who are sensible and say this and what. It's not that I don't want to be friends with black people. There are just these awful murdering, looting, burning, awful people that I don't want in my house. Now, does that make me racist? If a white person was going around necklacing people, I wouldn't want to know him either.
No, if well, what you are describing when you say that white people cannot be racist is you are describing Marxism, because Marxism consists of two groups. There's the bourgeois, who are the oppressors, and there is the proletariat, who are the oppressed. So in the Western paradigm, the bourgeois consist of white people, and the proletariat are what they have now started calling people of color. So they have divided us into two groups. There's a bourgeois and there's a proletariat. There's white people and there's a people of color. There's the racist and they're the victims of racism. It's just all Marxism top to bottom. That's all it is. And the fact of the matter is the most racist people that I've ever encountered are black people, not all of them, obviously. In fact, if you go to my website, you'll see up at the top there's a tab to click on called Video Library. And there's several videos by some very distinguished black people, such as Larry Elders and I can't think of the guy's name off my top of my head, the historian. Oh, Henry Louis Gates Jr. has several videos. And so there are some a lot of reasonable, intelligent black folks out there who are confronting the truth. And one of the things that Henry Louis Gates Jr. Informs us that nobody likes is that he goes to great lengths to explain that the slave trade isn't the fault of white people, wasn't the fault of Europeans. He said if it hadn't been for the black kings in Africa the chieftains, whatever you want to call them, who were engaged in the slave trade before white people showed up, there would have been no slave trade in the United States. You touched on that earlier. And he also points out, to the chagrin of liberals, that black on black, blacks owning blacks was very common in the United States. We mentioned that earlier. The first slave owner in American history was a black guy. Well, he wrote a editorial that was published, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now, where he editorialized against reparations. And he said the reason is that, number one, because black Africans were responsible for the slave trade, and number two, because so many black people in America were themselves slave owners. They owned slave labor. It's not that they owned their relatives, but they owned slave labor. And you can actually see that video of him saying that on my website. And he's probably the most respected black historian in the country. He's not accurate on everything, but he just tells the truth as he sees it. But if you take a look at the average intelligence level, this is why liberals hate. They're just in denial when it comes to IQ and intelligence, because it doesn't fit their paradigm. But the average IQ in Cameroon is 64, where mental retardation begins at 70. So the average person in Cameroon is retarded. In Liberia, it's 67. I'm looking at the list here, just looking at some of these countries. Somalia, the average IQ is 68. Niger, the average IQ is 69. Rwanda and Botswana, the average IQ is 70, and so forth. Well, if you go to the top of the list, the most intelligent nation on earth is Singapore, with an average IQ of 108. South Korea second, with 106. Japan is third, 105. So we see at the top of the list, the most intelligent people on earth, are East Asians and white people. East Asians tend to be more intelligent by a few points rather than white folks. And that is why, Karin, that in the United States, the average East Asian household income is higher than the average white household incomes, because they're slightly more intelligent, so they're going to make more money. When you have a free economy and people are allowed to prosper according to their ability and aptitude, smart people are going to make more money, and dumb people are going to make less money. Well, if you say that right out loud, they call you racist. But it's just a fact. So here's what's happening. The IQ disparity translates into an economic disparity. So we have this economic disparity between Western nations and third world nations. Well, the economic disparity is the effect of a cause, and the cause is intelligence disparity. Well, the way to remove the economic disparity is to remove the intelligence disparity. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get folks from the third world country to move into the Western nations. And what happens is the average IQ drops and the average prosperity level drops. So the disparity between income, from the way they see it, begins to level out. Well, it never will level out totally. But that is why wherever we go, they follow us. That's why Obama does not want there to be any white neighborhoods anywhere in the United States. And if you have a predominantly white neighborhood, or a neighborhood that's predominantly white and East Asian, consider it racist. They want to force us to accept people into our neighborhood who are not white or East Asian. And quite frankly, I don't care who lives in my neighborhood as long as they behave themselves. If they, keep their cats out of my fish pond, and their leaves out of my yard, what does it matter where they came from? It doesn't matter at all to me. The average IQ, by the way, in Mexico is 88. So that's what they're up to, is they're trying to remove that intelligence disparity so they can level out the economic disparity. And they're phenomenally successful at their effort, but I think ultimately they're going to fail. That is to say, they're going to fail humanity. You know, you've seen the guidestones in Georgia. I can't remember what they call them now, but they say that etched in stone that the objective is to reduce the world population to 500 million people.
Yes.
Well, somebody's got to die, you know, through attrition or just flat out die. But Karin, you know, we should realize that the reason that smallpox is gone, eradicated, is because of white technology. You say, well, white people have killed all these people. Well, we've saved the lives of millions. I would say we have a world population of 7 billion now. Has it not occurred to anybody that the population explosion and the technological explosion occurred simultaneously? You know, as we became more technologically advanced, there are more of us. And the liberals were telling us, have been telling us for decades, that when the population grows, there's going to be famine, there's going to be pestilence, there's going to be diseases of all kinds, it's going to be terrible. Well, the exact opposite has happened. We're actually wealthier now than we ever been, and we're also healthier now than we have ever been. And it's because the more people there are, the more intelligent people there are. And those intelligent people are concentrated in Western countries. And when Western countries fall, it's going to implode. And I think, Karin, that's their objective. But, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about 100 years from now, when we look back at history, all the accomplishments that Western culture has achieved will be attributed to non-white people.
Yes.
And the demise of the infrastructure will be blamed on white people, which is exactly what they're doing in South Africa right now. You know, with what's his name again that performed the first heart transplant? You were using that as an example.
Yeah, Chris Barnard.
Yeah. So they said his janitor performed the heart operation. And people will believe that. And they will believe that the Wright brothers did not invent the airplane, but they stole the plans from some black guy. And that the cotton gin was not invented by a white guy, but he stole it from a black slave, and so forth and so on. And they talk about these black empires that existed in Africa, which is just totally nonsense. You know, back the first century BC, there were Persian traders who blew off course, and they landed somewhere on the eastern coast of Africa at a place that is called Rapta. Nobody actually knows what it is, but we know from historical records that it's there somewhere. Well, when they landed in East Africa, they realized that there were natural resources that they could trade. And so they began a trade network that penetrated into Africa. And that connection was there over several centuries. And so they established outposts throughout Africa. There weren't a lot of them, but there were a few of them. And it wasn't just the Persians, but I think there were some of the traders from the Barbary Coast, Muslims, who came down and participated as well. And I think even the Portuguese were part of it. But as they were trading, they would build outposts throughout Africa. There's not a lot of them, but there were some of them. Well, what happens is when they discover these outposts, instead of saying, well, look what the Persians built, or look what the Portuguese built, they say, well, this is evidence of a great civilization that once existed among black people. They just distort history. They misinterpret it. There is a place called, they call it the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, and there is a archaeological site that is called Zimbabwe, and it's after the supposed kingdom that the nation is named. But you can actually go to that archaeological site, and you can see the outpost. It's still there. It's built out of stone. I'm telling you, the Africans did not build that. It was either Persians or Europeans that built it. But they say, no, there was obviously this great African empire that built this. Well, they're just flat out lying. Now, if you go to South America, you can see evidence of great empires. They built pyramids, but this is an outpost. It's not a pyramid. And if you go into South Africa, there's another archaeological site called Mapungubwe, I think is how they pronounce it. And it's a little outpost that is built on top of a I don't want to call it a mountain, but it's a very difficult hill that's, I say, difficult to access. And so they built their outpost out of stone on top of this hill because it was a safe place for them. But they were trading in gold and whatever. Well, historians go in there and they say, well, see here, this is evidence of a great black empire. It's an outpost. You know, it was built by Europeans or Persians. This should be obvious to anyone. But they translate it. They superimpose their philosophy over what they find and they misinterpret it. And you can't challenge them. They say, well, you know, this has been obscured by the white South Africans because they don't want us to know about this great empire that once existed there. Well, actually, the reason it was obscured by the apartheid government is because it's basically a pile of rocks. I mean, you know, there is archaeological significance to it, and it does deserve research, but not to the extent that they want to superimpose this false narrative that it's evidence of a great empire that once existed. In fact, Karin, they say that Mapungubwe was built by the Bantu. I don't know that the Bantu built anything. I'm not that familiar with South African history, but to my knowledge,
no.
They lived a Paleolithic existence.
They did. When the whites met up with the blacks 100 years after they landed at the Cape. So in 1752, when they finally met up with the actual black people, not the Khoi. They didn't have the wheel. They didn't have a written language. They did not build anything except, as you keep saying, we're going to live in grass huts. Well, they built grass huts, but they had no cities, no base, no nothing. So how did they come from building these wonderful places with beads found in the ruins? How did they come from that to not even working in steel? You know, I don't understand. But then again, if you're rewriting history, you can rewrite it any way you want. You can explain it any way you want it. But the truth is, they had no written language. They had no words for technological things. They had no words for. They didn't even have a word for tomorrow or yesterday. They were very basic people. And to say that the whites didn't do this is absolute nonsense, because they didn't even have villages, you know, in those days where they were settled. They had nothing. They were just marauding. I mean, they were coming down from West Africa and killing. I mean, if we talk about genocide, they genocided so many tribes on their way south that is absolutely frightening. But that is written out of history, and it's only the whites who killed these hundreds of thousands of blacks, which is totally not true.
Yeah, there's no doubt that blacks lived at Mapungubwe, but once it was abandoned by the Persians, Europeans, whoever were there, you know, it was just natural that blacks would move in. But in Mapungubwe, they say that the only people who actually inhabited that outpost after it was abandoned were the leaders of the tribe, and everybody else lived outside.
Yes.
Which makes perfect sense. But the point is, they didn't build it; they inhabited it after it was built and abandoned. So, but that's what we're up against. Now, here's the thing, Karin. Is you can't argue with them. You cannot challenge them. Mm-mm. Not only with archaeological finds, but with anything, because if you do, they don't argue with you. They don't, you know, there's no honest debate. They just call you names. You know, the reason that Mapungubwe is not being recognized is because white South Africans are racist. That's their answer.
Yes, absolutely.
Except for a few. Yep.
This year is a really, really bad year for white South Africans, because it started out on a very sour note, with a whole load of new racist laws being passed because of this. Now, I don't know if you've seen pictures of the beaches in South Africa before the end of apartheid and the beaches in South Africa today. But before the end of the apartheid, the blacks had beaches which they were allowed to have, but they were not allowed on the white beaches. Now, the white beaches were pristine, beautiful, well-kept, everything. Now, the blacks have a tradition that they have to go and be cleansed, a ritual cleansing in the sea on New Year's. So this year, on one beach, 500,000 of them descended on this one beach. And from the photographs and the aerial photographs, all you see is black. You cannot see a patch of sand. You cannot see anything. Now, these people descend there, and when they leave, they have to. The city council has to bring in bulldozers to clean the beaches because there is so much excrement on those beaches that they cannot possibly clean it. So they bring the bulldozers in and clean the whole beach up. And these blacks go now, and they leave their kids behind. There were over 1,000 children just left behind by their families. And these are not families who live in the area. These are families who've driven 5, 6, 7 hours to go to this cleansing day on the beaches. They just leave their kids behind. I mean, really, what kind of civilization is this?
Well, the answer is, if I were a globalist or a Marxist, I would say, well, that Karen Smith is a racist. Because
yes.
there is no answer. That's all you can do.
This one woman, now there is doubt about whether the woman even exists. But supposedly a woman called Penny Sparrow wrote on her Facebook page that these people behave like monkeys. And a very well-known radio personality came out in defense of her and said, people do not understand freedom of speech. Now, those two people, whether she exists or not, as I say, but apparently she was fired from her job and is being taken to court by the ANC. Now, this radio personality was also fired from his job, fired from his position as judge of Dancing with the Stars, and that's perfectly okay. So the ANC came out and said that this year they're going to crack down on white racism, and they made some new laws hurriedly overnight, making it a criminal offense to say these kind of things. But you look at this at one of the universities in South Africa, they have got a bunch of black people who have painted on their T-shirts FU whites and F all whites, and they've painted it over the entrance to the university. Now, this guy who started this process is being taken to the Human Rights Court in South Africa. But they have already said that he is not a racist because he is putting into practice his freedom of speech. So it's perfectly okay for him to walk around wearing a T-shirt and spray painting on the walls of the university F all whites. That's fine. But for a woman to say that these blacks behave like monkeys on New Year's Day on the beach, and for a white radio personality to say people do not understand freedom of speech, they get fired and taken to court under a criminal charge. How is this decent or fair or in any way legal?
Well, one of the principles that Karl Marx taught is to accuse others of what you do.
Yes.
And so what they are doing is they are being intolerant. But they accuse us of intolerance.
Yes.
So they're accusing us of what they're doing. They accuse us of being racist, but they're the ones who are racist. They accuse us of causing division, but they're the ones who are causing division. So it's a Marxist principle. You accuse others of doing what you're doing. Now, the only solution that I know of, and it's easy to identify a solution, it's something totally different to implement it, but white people need to somehow, some way, form a homogenous society. where they are exclusive. But I don't know of any place on Earth where that is still being done. I think Iceland may be the closest, the Isle of Man, the Falkland Islands. But wherever you see homogeneous white nations, white societies, Uruguay and South Africa is another one. I think it's 90% white. What you see is a high prosperity rate and a very low crime rate relative to other places. Now, Uruguay has a high crime rate relative to the United States, but it has one of the lowest crime rates, I think the second in all of Latin America. When people vacation in South America, they go to Uruguay because of low crime rate, relative low crime rate.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry about being mugged when they walk down the street like they would in, Argentina or Venezuela. But that is the solution. But how to accomplish that, I don't know how to do it, because we are so brainwashed. We are so convinced that the very notion of a homogeneous society, if it's white, is somehow racist. Now, a homogeneous non-white society is perfectly all right. And by the way, it is. Incidentally, I have no problem with a black entertainment network. I think that those people have certainly have a right, to self-determination. Why not? They have a right to their own neighborhoods. They have a right to tell us we can't come in their stores or their churches or whatever. They have that fundamental right of freedom of association. But to be consistent, everybody should have that right.
Yes. Absolutely.
And that's the problem.
Really. You know in South Africa that every company you have and every charity you give to and everything must be 90% black. And so I kind of understand that you have the right to have a black company with black employees, but not written into law with 119 laws against the, I think it's 5% minority is the whites in South Africa. Once you legalize and institutionalize racism to that degree, there is no hope. And the white South Africans are pleading, as is their right under the CODESA agreement, to have their own white piece of country that they can live in their way. But I do not believe that the ANC is ever going to allow it, because the whites are 85% of the tax-paying base, and they have no say about anything that goes on in the country, but they are that percentage of taxpayers. They are not going to let those taxpayers escape into a country of their own where they don't pay taxes to the ANC. So what is the answer to those people? There's not a country in the world that wants them or accepts them freely or will give them asylum or refugee status. And they can't live where they are because they can't work. So what is the answer for them? And nobody's going to come in and say, listen, you have to give them their own place to live, or you have to let them go somewhere else where they have their own place to live, because it's not going to happen. They are
Karin, there are, I'm guessing, probably thousands of affinity groups in the United States that are all black. You name any profession, they have a black union or a black affinity group or black association. Black physicians, black lawyers, black school teachers, there's a black everything.
Yes.
But if white people have an affinity group that's exclusive, then it's racist. And that's the problem. I see no problem whatsoever with black people forming affinity groups. Why not? The problem is the inconsistency. They cannot allow the bourgeois to empower themselves, because if we do, what's going to happen is everyone else will be left out. We will be advanced, and they will fall behind. So that's why they're doing what they're doing. But the thing that's so disturbing to me in South Africa is that the globalists and the Marxists don't care about the well-being of the people. They just don't.
No, neither black nor white. Because the black people in South Africa, the black masses, are suffering just as much. They are not getting an education. There is no economic growth. They do not have jobs. They are suffering. So, no, it's across the board. They don't care. There's a handful of elites that are getting super, super rich and powerful off of this. And the rest of the people, well, tough luck for you.
Yep, and even that will be temporary because you can only milk a cow so long until the cow dies.
Yes.
Then
Yes.
what? They're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. So it's a temporary gain. It's kind of like in black neighborhoods like in Detroit, where black folks will go in and they will shoplift. I call it slow burn looting. Well, eventually that store goes out of business. They can't shoplift anymore. You can only steal so much, and you take away the profit motive, and then it's gone. They can only do that in South Africa for so long, but the black elite in South Africa, and some of them I know aren't black, that are making millions, maybe billions of dollars, they can only milk that economy so long, and it's going to be gone. But the thing that bothers me so much is the globalists and the Marxists are the real racists, because they don't care about the black people in South Africa or anywhere in Africa or anywhere in the world. No. All they care about is the destruction of what they see as inequality. That's what they want gone. And so we're all going to have to live in grass huts. And the only way to get around that is that I could see is for white people to form homogenous communities. But that is racist, and they're not going to let that happen.
No.
Anywhere on the planet.
No, it is not going to happen. Definitely not, because some years back, the government in South Africa agreed to look at a white homeland and self-determination for the whites, because it was guaranteed under the agreements. But that was some years ago, and they still haven't formed their first committee to take a look at it, and they're not going to. They will just put it off as long as possible and just not deal with it. So it's not going to happen there, and it's not going to happen anywhere else. And if it did, the black areas would fall apart, and then they'd flow into the white areas again. So it's not going to help, because they follow us.
And we're dumb enough to let them.
Yes, we are. And
the bottom line is. Yep. But the problem that I see is, Karin, we're just not facing reality.
Yeah.
In psychology, there's a thing called psychosis. And basically, psychosis is a denial of reality. Well, there are two types of psychosis. One of them is delusion, and the other is hallucinations. Well, delusion, we talked about this earlier. That's where you firmly believe something, even though it's not true. It's like believing in white privilege. Even though it's not true, you still believe it. That's psychosis. Hallucination is when you see something that's not there. I mean, you literally think you see. It's like dreaming.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I had a problem with, I was seeing hallucinations. I went to the hospital, and they put that cap on my head to figure out what was wrong, and they figured it out and put me on medication. But it's really a weird thing. It's like dreaming while you're awake, but you really see those things.
Yeah.
And you don't know you're hallucinating until you come out of it. Then you say, man, what happened to me? First time it happened, I thought somebody had spiked my food with drugs or something. Really weird. But delusion is another form of psychosis. And what has happened is, I believe, the Freudian psychologists have figured out why we believe what we believe. And they have figured out how to convince us of things that are not true. And they have used the media to, quite frankly, literally brainwash us and convince us that what is true is not true and what is not true is true. And we've seen them do that with history. And so we are living, I think, in the Western world, we are living in a state of psychosis. We're quite frankly mentally ill. We're nuts because we believe things that are not true. Now, when I was back in the old days, back in the 1960s, when I went to high school, I went to a predominantly black school. And the thing that impressed my mind once I got over the culture shock is, how is it possible the black folks living in America have been here for so many generations and they still have not been able to assimilate? And this is in the 1960s. This is 100 years after the end of Civil War, after the end of slavery.
Yeah.
And even today, we're seeing the same thing. The Baltimore riots, the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, they simply are not assimilating. And we have to acknowledge the fact that there is a genetic basis for that. But we can't say that because it's racist. So we have to live in this state of delusion. We have to deny reality, and if we don't, they're going to call us names. If we don't accept, if we accept the truth, they're going to say that we're white supremacists or whatever. But in the end, it actually hurts the people that they are trying to protect. There was an article in Science magazine, I think this week, where they were challenging the genetic basis for the existence of race. It's totally crazy. It's very easy to go on the internet and do a search on forensics and race. So when they find the skeleton of a human, there are, I don't know, maybe hundreds of ways to determine the race of that skeleton.
Yes.
You know, everything from teeth size, to skull size, whatever. So the genetics is obviously there. You look at somebody, they're dark. It's genetic. It's physiological. How do you deny it? But they do.
Cannot. Come to the end of the show. It's always, always for me a great pity to have to tell you that, because you are a fascinating person. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we will speak again soon.
Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Kenn. God bless America, God bless South Africa, and God bless the world we live in today. And I'm playing out with my own little bit of contradiction to those in power, destem.